Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. We're going to give it another minute or so before Renee and I dive into the content. Hey, we are going to go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining. For folks who are new to this, I'm Allison Kretzinger. I'm our Director of Public Affairs here at the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And I'm joined by Renee Newkirk, our Chief Financial Officer. We're here to share with you in 58 quick minutes an update on the legislative session, the conclusion of the legislative session, the budget realities, and next steps. With that, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you, Jessica. A good reminder, we have live Spanish interpretation today. I will do my best to talk slow. I may be reminded to talk slow. Just own that. Thank you all for your patience and grace. We also have a live captioner. So this is the first time we've had these interactive tools. So bear with us. If there are challenges, please let us know. And as always, open to feedback to get this right as we move forward in the most inclusive way possible for our communities and constituents. A couple of things to note. We'll go over the end of the legislative session, bills, and the budget realities. It is very, very important to note this information is current as of yesterday. The governor has not signed the budget or all bills yet, and so things are pending change, potentially, in the next week. We anticipate next week, mid-next week, that the governor to take action on the budget and the remaining set of bills, as that's the timeline allotted or the timeline required to follow. So we'll have that. Any updates to this webinar will be done with a version 2. If there are things that are vetoed or changed, we'll get those updated and put forward next week after final conclusion of the budget. Just think that's important to note. With that, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Just a timeline overview as a reminder for folks. We're in that phase where session has ended. The governor is contemplating all the bills and budget, pending final signature, and the agencies are pivoting towards implementation. Go ahead and go to the next slide. A couple of realities that we want to be able to highlight. And I'll just note there is a question and answer or Q&A function available in the Zoom webinar. Feel free to type your questions. Some of those Renee and I or others may respond to live. Some of those we may type responses to, and some of them we may not be able to answer today. I'll remind folks, this is really looking back at the action the legislature took. We are not going to be speaking in the weeds or in detail about impacts to the changes and implementation. That is not the purpose of this webinar. We would be here all day. And Renee and I don't have that level of detail on May 14th for most items. So we know there's going to be a lot of revenue or a lot of implementation questions. Those will be unveiled as plans are developed, as communication is rolling out with the impact. So I just want to say that to help us all manage our expectation and what we'll get through today. A couple of realities I just think are important to note. This was a long session, year 1 of a biennial session, and it's the session that sets the budget for the next 2 years, the operating budget that goes into effect July 1. We also have a new governor for the first time in Washington state in 12 years, and we had significant lawmaker change. New policy chairs, new secretary, new policy chairs, new members across both chambers. So all of that just impacts the dynamic and the reality. And I think more humbling and more sobering is the revenue reality that our state is facing. We are seeing our revenues outpace our spending outpace our revenues. And as a result, the legislature for the first time in a while had to make really difficult choices around how to balance a budget. You see a mix of program elimination, reduction and savings captured through program reduction and anticipated ongoing underspend. You see the legislature respond in areas necessary with new spending and new investment, and you see new revenue generation in the form of new taxes and new ways of revenue adjustments of revenue coming into the state. So the legislature really took a multi-pronged approach in response to the necessities of what the state needs in this moment. And I can tell you, as we walk through this for the next hour, you're going to see that in DCYF. You're going to see areas of reduction, elimination, and new, sometimes even in the same program. With that, I'll turn it over to Renee to just to touch on the revenue reality, introduce herself, and then we'll dive into the robust set of content.
Thanks, Allison. Yes, again, this is Renee Newkirk, Chief Financial Officer here at the Department of Children, Youth, and Families. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I'll just reiterate what Allison noted. The state is currently faced with a $15 billion budget deficit over the next 4 years. So the legislature was really faced with a challenge this session. As Allison noted, you'll see the legislature take some service and program reductions, some with assumed underspend, some program or service eliminations. Also, there are assumptions regarding some additional revenue in the amount of $8.7 billion over the next 4 years. And there's a variety of new revenues assumed. Various B&O tax charges and adjustments, estate tax adjustments, as well as certain excise tax changes, just to high level note those revenue assumptions in the budget. So with that, I will turn it back over to Allison.
Thanks so much, Renee. And so we'll dive in. The way the format of this is going to work is I'm going to talk about pieces of legislation or bills that passed in a given sort of portfolio area. And then Renee and I will tag team walking through some of the budget items that had changed. So where we see underspend or reductions, eliminations, or new spending in each of our portfolio areas. So first, we'll talk about prevention and child welfare. These are largely policy and funding decisions in our partnership, prevention, and services space, our child welfare field operations space, part of our licensing space. 5 bills here that we're touching on today. I will note that most of these, especially the first 2, are sort of minor technical modifications to existing statute and program. I will note on the first one, the child fatality statute. That's really about the Department of Health's child fatality review statute and making updates to that. Our impact is largely through records and disclosure. The next bill, 5149, expands the early childhood court programs by making clear that children up to 6 can participate, through the age 6 can participate in that program. We see some policy change directing rulemaking, as well as investment in the child welfare housing program to buy down, if you will, the wait list. There are more families seeking housing support as well. And then we also have the Family Reconciliation Services, which Renee will also speak to, but this bill is the culmination, I will just take a moment to note, of years of work, of co-design work with partners and with those who have been impacted by FRS, those with lived experience, staff, to really re-envision and reimagine family reconciliation services delivery in a community-based model. This began its journey as agency request legislation a few years ago. It was not put forward this year as agency request legislation, not approved, but was picked up by Representative Taylor, codifies that work, and does fund one community-based pilot. So pleased to see that bill pass. The last bill here is our ESIT program, our Early Supports for Infants and Toddlers program. Does see an increase to the multiplier as passed by a larger initiative or bill contemplating special education delivery in the K-12 system. So with that, I will pause, turn it over to Renee, and we'll talk through some of the investment portions.
Thank you, Allison. What you see here on this slide are underspend savings in the area of prevention and child welfare. I will note that underspend savings, these are reductions that have been made to our budget based on projected underspend. I will note that with this assumption, in some cases, there will actually be an impact to clients served. And in some cases, there will not be. It just is dependent on that underspend savings assumption. Again, this is just an assumption in the budget. If that doesn't make sense, or if you would like some clarification, please feel free to drop a question in the chat. Just wanted to make sure that it is clear that in some cases there will be an impact, in some cases there will not be. So the first one, intensive foster care assessment. This is our FCAP program, the foster care assessment program. This is a reduction to our contract. And in this case, we do anticipate there to be an impact here. Sexually aggressive youth is reduced based on underspend. So no impact to current clients served. It does impact our ability to expand, but no impact to current clients served. Guardianship subsidy underspend, there's a reduction here, and it is not anticipated for there to be an impact to clients. DS referrals and transitions. This is related to the DS settlement agreement. And this is an underspend and is not anticipated for there to be an impact here. Caregiver supports adjustment. I would like to clarify here that caregiver supports pertains to legislation that passed a year or two ago pertaining to a new 7-level system in foster care that was implemented. There were 7 levels of payment transitioning from a 4-level system to a 7-level system for foster care maintenance payments. This adjustment here does not pertain to that. This adjustment here only pertains to the caregiver supports component of that 7-level system, which is case management and case aid supports. This is an adjustment of funding. Therefore, there is no impact here. We will continue providing the same level of service that is being provided today. And the assumption made when this legislation passed was that these supports would be phased into what we're referring to as catchment areas. And so the department will continue to roll out to those catchment areas, and services will continue to be provided. So no impact is anticipated here. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. Child-specific underspend. This pertains to child-specific licenses that are specific to our Indian children. And this assumption here is based on underspend, and we do not anticipate there to be an impact to clients served. Emergent placement beds, also a reduction based on assumed underspend. This reduction here, current EPS beds that we have in place online will remain to be in place and online. Also want to flag here, as we will see in some new investments that we have in child welfare, the legislature also funds an additional 10 beds of EPS as it relates to the DS settlement agreement. So just wanted to also flag that nuance here. Combined in-home services, this is a reduction based on assumed underspend. So we will be able to continue providing the same level of service to current clients as they are receiving them today, but we will not be able to expand that within our current budget. The 7-level foster care project manager, this pertains to the caregiver supports, that 7-level system that I referred to. We'd received funding for a project manager to assist as we were bringing online caregiver supports as a new initiative. And that has successfully, I don't know, I shouldn't say successfully, that has come online. And therefore project management is no longer needed, and therefore funding is reduced for this. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. This slide represents our prevention and child welfare program eliminations. The Intercept program is eliminated. I will note that the department received funding for this program only through fiscal year 26. So it was not an ongoing program. And at the time that this was in development to come online, it became known to us that the state was faced with a budget deficit. So we had decided to not implement, and therefore taking this as a program elimination. Safe Care elimination. This is a contract in Grays Harbor County for the Safe Care program. There is currently not a provider in place, and this is being eliminated. Crisis Family Intervention eliminated. This is short-term counseling services aimed at reducing conflict. And I will just note that this is a service component of FRS, the FRS statute that Allison referred to earlier. Foster care respite elimination. I would like to clarify, this is not eliminating foster care respite. This is eliminating one contract in one region that is specific to case aids. Case aids are available to caregivers under Caregiver Supports Initiative, so that service is still available, but this contract is being eliminated. CSEC Receiving Center elimination. There was funding in the budget to implement 2 receiving care centers. Funding was not sufficient for the department to implement those receiving care centers, and therefore was not being utilized, and therefore that funding is eliminated. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. And these are program reductions in the area of prevention and child welfare. The home visiting program is being reduced by $3 million. It is assumed underspend. However, there will be impact to this program. So just wanted to note that. The FRS program is being reduced in funding that's equivalent to 7 FTEs. So this is a reduction within our child welfare budget. But I also do want to note that the FRS statute is remain unchanged, and therefore the department is still required to provide FRS services. Pediatric interim care is a reduction. This program is being reduced. What is remaining in this program after this level of reduction is $100,000 for one of our pediatric interim care centers. The Mentor Washington contract is being reduced by $250,000. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. And this slide represents new investments in the area of child welfare and prevention. Funding is received for critical incident review staff. These staff provide reviews in fatality or near fatality cases. The next item, foster care work group. There is a proviso in our budget for $50,000 to convene a work group for the purpose of examining rights of foster care youth. Rising Strong funding. This is a continuation of funding to support the Rising Strong model in Spokane. Positive Indian Parenting. This is a new investment available to us, and this will be available in 3 locations for 3 sites, rather. DS, as I referred to, DS is a settlement agreement for the purpose of eliminating the use of hotel stays and night to night. So there is additional investment here, additional placement types, such as the adolescent transition living program, group receiving care beds, some intensive group receiving care beds. And this is also where we see those additional emergent placement beds as well. Additional funding to support 2 FTEs, 2 staff for CSEC and missing tribal youth for the purpose of supporting victims of human trafficking and sexual abuse for missing tribal youth. Also an investment there. So that concludes the new investments for child welfare and prevention. So yes, Allison.
I think we'll pause here and respond to some of the questions related to this section before we move to the early learning space. The first is a more macro level question. How will DCYF be measuring impacts of these changes in funding? It's a great question. Many of these items are, we were not prepared to change funding, reduce or eliminate, and so are working through that on the implementation side. Some of them, like Renee noted, are not yet implemented, so there isn't quite change to monitor, other than clearly we're envisioned for a reason, and there's definitely a impact to not being able to now or in the future provide that service. So I think it will vary by program. Some will be able to measure, and frankly, some we won't. There might be downstream or long-term impacts with, I think largely about the early learning space, some of the delays, some of the eliminations of programs there will have certainly impacts down the road as we just sort of are reducing access to prevention. So great question. And I don't have a concrete answer of how we're going to codify or quantify impacts. Renee, I'm going to turn to you. There's a question. Can you talk a little bit about what assumed underspend actually means? So perhaps just sort of repeat and reinforce the complexity of budgets and underspend, et cetera.
Yes, it is a little bit complicated. So we receive an appropriation in some cases for specific line items if it's referred to specifically in our budget. But we receive an appropriation, we receive an allotment for a specific service. And then spending, if we are not spending up to that appropriated or allotted amount, then it is underspend. So then if we're not fully utilizing that funding, and where I've referred to if there's an impact to clients or not an impact to clients, sometimes or in some cases, it may not be an entirely accurate underspend assumption, or it may not be an accurate underspend assumption ongoing, if that makes sense. It is a little bit complicated. So I don't know if that addressed the question. So feel free to put another question in if that didn't fully answer it.
Yeah, it is a bit complicated. It will be hard to fully understand, to articulate in this moment. We'll do our best. Couple other questions related to underspend, FRS and caregiver supports. So we'll stay here. I work in home visiting. I'm not a finance person, so I don't completely understand. A $3 million reduction in funding that is quote unquote presumed underspend. Would you clarify? So Renee, if I may dive in, and then I'll let you, we'll sort of tag team to sort of help clarify this one here. So when the legislature projects spending, they sort of say, we think, like in your home budget, right? I project my mortgage is going to be $5. I'm being hyperbolic for purposes here. I project my mortgage is going to be $5. Now, my property tax, my escrow dollar amounts may fluctuate, but when I set my budget at the beginning of the month, I've put $5 there. If my property tax changes, goes up and down, I may spend $7, in which case I have overspent that projection. I may spend $3, in which case I have underspent that projection. In state budgets, when we're making our budgets, we're doing our best to assume the actual spend down of a given service. Sometimes we get it right, and sometimes we don't spend fully. And so in home visiting, for example, there has been over the years a fund balance that remains at the end of the year because there's been underspend throughout the year in varying contracts. So with this action by the legislature, they assume a $3 million reduction over the biennium, but they also assume that will just be sort of natural underspend given the history. We will, in home visiting, have to make adjustments to service delivery and contracts potentially to absorb that, because we are projected to spend the full account amount. And don't assume that we necessarily will have that level of savings or underspend each year. So those decisions will come in the implementation conversation that program is having. There's an HVSA meeting today, and there'll be ongoing conversation about how we're going to manage and mitigate some of these. Unlike some areas where they're forecasted and their case list adjustments on underspend, they sort of correct themselves. There are some where we're going to have to make programmatic changes. I hope I didn't confuse that more. It is complicated, but for some of these, there's going to be cuts. Oh, thank you. It was helpful. Great.
Yes, thank you.
Renee, I'm going to turn to you to talk a little bit about caregiver supports. There's a couple of questions. I think one is just characterizing the reduction as no impact is a bit insensitive. There have been numerous changes with the contract. People are losing jobs. Services are being reduced currently. An additional repeating the caregiver supports line. I think it'd be helpful to talk a little bit about sort of this current fiscal year, the contract conversation, and then what this means, so we can clarify that.
Right, absolutely. So in caregiver supports, given that this is a new initiative that has launched, if you will, so it's something new. And so the funding that was provided for this was more funding than what we are currently utilized. So that's why this one is referred to an adjustment. So it's adjusting the funding. Not to get too much into the details, but as Allison mentioned, some services within our budget are forecasted, meaning that's a separate process in which the funding is adjusted based on the need. You may refer to it also as an entitlement program. So those supports, case aids, and case management are included in our forecast. So based on the need, based on spending trends, it gets a little bit complex. There's a lot of different factors that go into it in terms of modeling and trending and projecting out, but our funding will get adjusted through that process based on what we are spending. So not my intention to be insensitive in this area at all, but just wanted to note that our funding will be adjusted based on what we are spending, based on the need. And this was characterized as an adjustment to this service line or service lines. And so therefore, that's why I say there will not be an impact based on the current spending trend today. And we will continue. And in addition to that, we will continue with our phased in approach of rolling out to those additional catchment areas with that same sort of spending trajectory. And I do acknowledge, yes, that there were the contracting challenges that I believe and hopefully are being worked through.
Yeah, so the last one here is related to, thank you, Renee, FRS, Family Reconciliation Services. A couple of questions, and Renee and I can sort of tag team the response here. Is the reduction in FRS due to the passage of 1509? I don't have any indication to believe that those two items are linked or connected to each other. I think the legislature made a choice to pass a bill and honor the work of the co-design process and begin that move to community-based, while also making a choice to reduce the allotment, if you will, the agency gets for FRS. I think it's important to note, however, the statutory obligations around FRS, which Kashi goes a little bit into your question, the statutory obligations around FRS did not change for DCYF. So although there is a reduction to FRS, I'll turn it over to Renee, because I don't want to get it wrong, to talk about our plan for implementation of that in light of the current statutory obligations remaining in place.
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Allison. So given that the statute is still in place, we are still required to provide FRS services. So the department will do so. We will continue to provide those FRS services. So how we will manage this reduction essentially is it reduces the child welfare budget, and the department has not yet determined precisely what that will look like. But we will continue providing FRS services as we are required to by law within our budget that is given to us, which is now reduced. So it's a little bit vague, I understand, but some of these, we're still working through the details of how exactly we are going to implement these reductions. So just providing the information that I have today.
Thank you. All right, with that, we one final question on FCAP, Renee, is the intensive foster care program the foster care assessment program? Yes, that is FCAP, the intensive foster care assessment program. And is the 300K cut, proposed, or set? It was shared the underspend was not related to service need. I'll let Renee talk a little bit more about FCAP. I'll repeat that.
Yes, so the assumption made in the budget is that it's based on underspend. Our contract, this is a contract with Harborview, that contract is being reduced, and so we do believe there will be an impact.
Great. There's another question, sort of general, around program continuing. We're just not prepared to answer that. That's really in the weeds of sort of impact and implementation. Appreciate the question, Kim. Not something Renee and I are prepared to speak to today around kids coming in and out of care, services, etc. I definitely understand the desire there, and we're not gonna be able to respond to that today. We're just not prepared. And with that, pivot to the next slide, and we'll start talking about early learning. Variety of bills passed in the early learning space, less than in previous years. Yep, there's a question in the chat. I'm just getting to the early learning bills, so you're right in time. So variety of bills that passed. The first 1314 makes updates and modifications to the Early Learning Facilities Fund program administered in partnership with us, but at Commerce. That bill passed and has been signed. 1351, as well as a portion of 5752, clarify and adjust ECAP entitlement and ECAP eligibility. So making clear that those who turn 3 after the cutoff can enroll in ECAP and are not considered as part of the entitlement. Also moving up some of the dates and really cleaning up what was some layered eligibility statutes there in ECAP, but generally increasing a bit more access to a few more families and really creating some efficiency in streamlining that. 1648 is the bill that passed, modifying the child care professional development requirements. This does delay the timeline by which staff need to meet the qualification requirements, also adjusts the length of the experienced competency pathway, and creates a work group for the department to continue the conversation with providers about how to build out the necessary supports to meet that pathway. 5030 expands the type of document and record that are allowed to verify birth date or age. This applies to ECAP, but also the broader K-12 system. Transitional kindergarten is essentially put on pause from growth by 5769. And then the legislature directs OSPI and DCYF to work on some planning and phasing. And then 5752, it's been a number I have not remembered all session, does a variety of things. We're going to walk through some of the funding pieces it does in the funding slides. But what this also does is it creates a pilot for school age licensing care in partnership with a local municipality. It also, like I said, clarifies some of the ECAP ages, and then requires the department for compliance with child care development rules, which we'll talk about, and increases the frequency of the market rate survey and the cost of quality survey. So some policy pieces in there, as well as some funding and pieces. I know there's desire to go deeper into the weeds on the professional development bill 1648. We're just not prepared to do that today. intended to be high level, more opportunity to come on that. I think at high level, what it does is it delays the timeline. High level, what it does is delays the timeline by which childcare providers need to comply. More to come after we get through this first round of reductions and budget implementation on the implementation of new policy. 1314 is for ECAP only because ECAP is the only program that has age requirements. 3-year-olds can enroll in childcare, etc. So just we'll note that. There's a ECAP directors meeting today. More detail on the 1351 and the ECAP space there. It's largely a technical change to clarify that if a child turns 3 after the cutoff date in statute, they are allowed to roll into an ECAP program if there is space available, but are not part of the larger entitlement numbers. Question about 5-year work experience being cumulative. I'm not going to get into the implementation details of the bills today. More information coming as we roll out the implementation for that. Okay, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. I'm going to talk through a few of the funding investments in this space, and then we'll turn it over to Renee to do a few as well. So the first one, center-based rates. Current law or previous law and under the Fair Start for Kids Act, the rate was set to increase. The rate was set to increase to the 85th percentile of the most recent market rate survey on July 1, 2025. The legislature made a choice to delay that by a year. So although this number is black because there is still an investment in this biennium, I know for center-based providers, it does feel like a reduction. It feels like a cut. It is a delayed implementation of that rate increase, and I just want to acknowledge that tension. In addition, in fiscal year 27, the legislature is right-sizing the rate reality to remove the sort of hold harmless or readjust to recalibrate. All rates will be at that 85th percentile of the market rate survey. There were a few that sat above that. The collective bargaining agreement for family childcare providers was fully funded. So that includes a rate increase for family childcare providers, the cost of quality bonus, as well as some other pieces that are bargained through that agreement with our partners at SEIU 925, and the legislature fully funds that CBA, like they did, I think, all CBAs this year. And then the legislature does direct the department to comply with the new child care development rules, enrollment-based pay, prospective pay, and a few others. There is some acknowledgement that we will comply and write rules around those pieces. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. So there are also changes to eligibility for Working Connections and ECAP, and so I'll talk about those eligibility changes. The legislature chose to delay the Working Connections childcare eligibility expansion that was set to be expanded in this biennium to 75% SMI. That is delayed until 2029, so there will not be eligibility expansion based on income. The legislature also eliminated the eligibility for childcare providers up to 85% SMI. And with that, they did not have a copay. So the legislature eliminated that element, that population from eligibility, as well as the registered apprenticeship program. I will note the student parent eligibility is an underutilization or an underspend. There are no changes to eligibility there, but there is some adjustment to this forecasted item based on utilization of the program. The legislature also increased co-payments for families. So you will see families who are on Working Connections childcare will see co-payments increase in October of 2026. There was also a change to how the department implements and starts and stops, if you will, 12-month authorization. So that change happened in law, and there's assumed savings with that. The department is working in partnership to implement that as quickly as we can with our partners at Barcode. In addition, the legislature delayed ECAP entitlement. That was set to go, the entitlement was set to go in effect by this biennium. That is delayed to the 2030-31 school year. So pretty significant, pretty significant changes to eligibility and dates that will certainly impact families and providers who serve them. With that, I will turn it over to Renee to talk through some of the other changes, and I'll work on responding to questions by typing.
Thank you, Allison. Okay, we can go ahead and go to the next slide. This slide covers our ECAP and Eclipse funding. There's a mix here of some new investment as well as reduction. The ECAP rate increase is increased by 5% for school day slots beginning in fiscal year 26, which is July 1st of 2025. ECAP slots are reduced by 3,000. That's the part day slots, also beginning fiscal year 26, which is July 1st of 2025. Also receiving, though, however, a slot increase of 250 school day slots is effective in fiscal year 27. The ECAP needs funds is reduced, and Eclipse, our early childhood intervention and prevention services, is also reduced. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. These are some other program reductions and eliminations in early learning. Trauma-informed care enhancement is eliminated for center-based providers, but is retained for family child care providers. So I will note here as I walk through this slide and I believe the next slide, you will note there are some differences in regards to how center-based providers and family child care is managed within the legislative budget, because as Allison noted, the legislature did approve collective bargaining agreements, and with family child care providers covered under a CBA collective bargaining agreement. Therefore, that's why we see those differences here. So just want to note that as we proceed. The dual language designation, there is a 50% reduction for center-based child care providers, and it is retained for family child care providers. The early ECAP program is eliminated. It's also noted here, there's some additional back office supports that support this program. So that's inclusive of all of the funding for this program being eliminated. Working Connection seasonal childcare, this funding is removed. However, I will note that as we talked about our forecast and how that is managed, seasonal childcare is now captured in the forecast. So therefore, seasonal childcare will continue to be available. This will continue to be provided and services received. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. Our equity grants, this funding is reduced by 50% for center-based providers and retained for our family child care providers. Child Care Complex Need Fund, this is reduced by 25%. The Early Learning Facilities Technical Assistance Fund, this is something that we did not access, and therefore it is an underspend and taken as a reduction. The remaining three are also reduced: facilitated play and learn groups, infant and early childhood mental health consultation, as well as tribal mental health consultation, also reduced. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. A few additional investments: Washington Communities for Children, a one-time investment of $2 million. Also an investment of $300,000 for Child Care Mental Health Pilot Program in Spokane. And I want to note the Early Learning Facilities Fund, this is not in our budget, it is in the Department of Commerce's budget, but some additional funding here provided: $51 million for early learning facilities, $9 million for minor renovations, and $3 million for emergency grants. So those are some new investments in early learning. And I think we can pause here, Allison, unless you've responded to questions in the chat. But I'll turn it over to you.
I'm frantically trying to respond to as many as I can. There's some technical questions. Is the complex reduction underspend, the complex needs reduction underspend specific? Renee, the complex needs reduction is not underspend. That is a reduction to that grant program. We have spent down the complex need grant and have had, frankly, more demand than in the grant pool. So that is not an underspend. That will be a reduction to the total level of funding available in that grant program during the next cycle. We're unfortunately, because of time, not going to be able to go back to the contract with Harborview. Jen, happy to have a conversation offline as we talk about implementation. We don't have any more detail on that one yet. Yeah, great question. Not sure if this makes sense. We know mental health is on the rise. How will DCYF work with this if funds are not available? We unfortunately are bound to the reality of the budget that is our authorizing environment and authorizes us to do spending. We know that needs of children, youth, families, the providers who serve them are greater than we certainly have resource for, and than we had resource for before, and frankly, more than we have resource for now. I'm not sure that I have a good answer to your question other than to acknowledge that we don't disagree and are concerned. Yeah, it's a hard moment for sure. Thank you for the sentiment in question. Okay, there's a few more questions that we'll get to here. I can type them, but why don't we go ahead and pivot to JR. So I'm going to talk briefly about a few pieces of legislation in the juvenile rehabilitation space that passed. I think important to note for folks and partners interested in this space, there are two bills that we talked about in our mid-session webinar that are not on the list, that did not pass. And those are two bills that were intended to help mitigate the population growth and the population realities in JR facilities. So I just will name that. We're typically not talking about things that didn't pass, but I think given the focus and energy on those bills, it is worth noting they did not pass. But there are a few bills that did. The first one, 5032, clarifies the role of the ombuds in supporting JR and working with families or young people, those who have a desire for a sort of formal conversation or investigate complaint, if you will, in the JR space. So clarifying that role. We also see a timeline modification to the conversation around institutional education. We do see passage of 1815, the prison riot bill, and I'll just note local municipalities have moved quickly, and we're seeing implementation of this bill very quickly, vacating the crime, the prior crime, and actually seeing some release of young people, both from the DOC system and soon to be the DCYF system. So moving quickly there. 1391 does some work around alternatives, court alternatives, diversion, and data collection. And then 5128 clarifies the intent of the Medicaid waiver and our work on the Medicaid waiver implementation. Go ahead and go to the next slide, and I will talk about some of the JR investments. So significant, as Renee and I talked about at the outset, DCYF is experiencing significant reduction and some areas of new spending. JR is an area where the legislature chose to make some investments. I believe this is in response to a growing population, continued upstream and prevention investment needed, and responding to the complex needs and the higher acuity of young people in our care. So we see that the block grant does receive a significant investment. Excited to begin implementation of that. The legislature also does invest in the new Harbor Heights facility that DCYF will be operationalizing in June. You see investment in our continued work around opioid use disorder, both intervention and treatment, direct care staff, as well as contract to continue that care post-release. You see some investment in staffing, classification staff, behavior management staff for the agency to continue to make progress in updating our classification process and implementing our behavior management system in JR. You do see some one-time investment in staffing at Green Hill and continued investment in the security of Echo Glen security until that fence is complete. If we want to go ahead and go to the next slide. couple other pieces of investment, and then some proviso language. Surveillance record system. So DCYF is required to store a lot of data and a lot of footage. This is really about updating our technology and storage for that footage in our JR facilities. We also see investment in beginning the work around communication technology and resources for young people. Unlike the DOC system and other carceral settings across the state, our JR facilities have sort of centralized phones in each unit or wing, and it really limits young people's ability to engage in more contact with their family, their loved ones, as well as engage in education and programming. So we really want to move to an individualized communication system. This will begin that work of figuring out procurement, a vendor, figuring out how to implement across our secure facilities. And then you see two proposals related to the proviso language related to direction for the agency to focus on data, projection, population growth, etc. Go ahead and go to the next slide. I'll turn it back over. Oh, nope, I won't. I will talk about capital investments. I got ahead of myself. In addition, JR is a place where we have capital investment. We have 10 facilities across the state, 11 facilities across the state, and as a place where we have ongoing capital need. So the first one is pre-design and design work for additional JR capacity, Mission Creek or other facilities that may help mitigate and add capacity to the population growth. We also see funding to update our 6-year master plan. The last time we had done a master plan was pre-implementation of some of the changes of JR and pre-COVID. And so it is time, it is 6 years ago that we did that. So we'll update our master plan. This is really the opportunity to be on the record about what the facility footprint for JR should look like. You also see upgrades to HVAC units, and then at Green Hill, some modifications to the entry point, and then some planning around a family visit space or center at Echo Glen. This is a need we know exists. We have more young people who have their own families, and our visitation space at Echo frankly just doesn't exist. And we know we need to make some investment here. So as part of the trajectory of a capital process, you start with pre-design work and then design work and then construction work. And so this is the beginning of that capital process in state agency land. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And now I will turn it over to Renee.
Thank you, Allison. Our program support, this is essentially a budget code, if you will, which program support refers to back office, but also some of our prevention services and adolescent services as well. So just wanted to note that. So this slide will cover elimination and increases within that budget code, if you will. The teen child detention release funding is reduced. So this is separate from teen child services provided for in our JR program. So just wanted to note that distinction. The LifeSet program has been eliminated. This is a services provided to adolescents. Independent living investment. This is the ongoing rate increase that was provided to independent living providers. And so that rate increase will continue. Comprehensive Child Welfare System, our CWIS system. This is a case management system in child welfare. This is an IT project that was funded. Social Security benefits funding is provided for the department to adopt rules to establish procedures for children and caregivers to request and to receive disbursement of Social Security and other public funds. This is one-time funding. We can go ahead and go to the next slide, and I will turn it back over to Allison.
So I will note, we have not had significant time as an agency to unpack all other agency budgets. There are significant impacts to a variety of pieces and places that will impact our clients, the families we serve in other agencies. I do want to note this study that was funded in the Office of the Insurance Commissioner's budget related to insurance rates. Contracted service providers, regulated service providers across our continuums have been impacted by dramatic increases in liability insurance if they can find it. This is really the legislature and the insurance commissioner acknowledging this is a significant problem and beginning to unpack and understand why, the cause, and solutions. So I think this is important to note. It will impact providers across the continuum of DCYF, and we're excited that this is funded and to partner in this work. The other thing I will note, not on here, there is a significant reduction to our partners at Treehouse and the program that provides education support and access, in addition to other contracted service dollars, pass-through dollars in the OSPI budget to community-based providers doing incredible work to support vulnerable populations furthest from education justice. We recognize the impact of that and are working our hardest to understand what could potentially be done to mitigate. So I do want to acknowledge that impact as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Renee to briefly talk about staffing realities for DCYF, and we'll continue to answer some of these questions.
Thank you, Allison. So as noted, the legislature approves and funds collective bargaining agreements. So with that, employees of DCYF are receiving a 3% salary increase that's effective July 1st, followed by a 2% salary increase effective July 1st of 2026. There was also some targeted classifications and ranges, as noted on this slide, of adjustments and increases. I will also note there's reductions, staffing reductions, referred to as administrative efficiencies. There's administrative efficiencies, and then also as we walked through the budget and noted where there was some service eliminations or reductions. With those reductions, there's also some staff impacts, meaning that some staff and positions will be eliminated. The totality of that for DCYF is 60 positions, that's 60. 35 of those 60 positions are vacant positions, 25 of those are filled positions with employees impacted, laid off, their positions eliminated. Those employees have been notified, and we're walking through that process now. I should also note that within administrative efficiencies, that category of positions impacted is administrative, executive, management level positions, not frontline workers, not frontline staff. It is that executive level positions. So those are other impacts, staffing impacts. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. And I believe that concludes our webinar. I will just want to say thank you before I turn it over to Allison. This is a really, really difficult webinar to present on and to deliver with the impacts. It is the reality that our state is faced with at this moment in time. And I do also will always continue to be transparent. What we presented on today was the conference budget, the legislative budget, realities that our state is faced with. And also we will be preparing for reductions at the federal level. We don't know what those are. The federal fiscal year is a separate cycle. It's the state fiscal year is July 1st to June 30th. The federal fiscal year is October 1st through September 30th. We don't know at this moment in time what reductions will be, what they will look like, but we do anticipate, based on the federal landscape, that there will be some reductions to come. So I just wanted to be transparent and note that I don't have any further information to share, but we are anticipating there to be some further reductions. So just wanted to note that. And again, this was a very, very difficult webinar to deliver, but thank you for attending today. Allison.
I would just echo that. Thanks for attending. There are some questions about ESIT. We covered that at the top of the deck. If you weren't here, I apologize. Feel free to go back and review the slides. The webinar will be posted in the next week or so. Again, this is as of today and yesterday. We will update this deck as needed, pending final action by the governor with vetoes and/or signatures. And I'll just reiterate what Renee said. Times are challenging for us, for you, for the families we serve. Take care of yourselves during this time, and more to come in the coming weeks, especially as we begin implementation. And there are a lot of questions about implementation, communication, especially on the early learning side. I can assure you we have plans, a communication plan, more to come. It takes us this much time to just unpack the budget and the choices. And now we'll begin that next phase of winding down programs, making adjustments, and the communication. So thank you all for joining. And we'll be in touch.